Ed. Yeah. So I'm going to. Okay, they're getting ready to start. It's 7 o'clock now.
Well, I don't know what it's then we throw the computer hours.
It's 7 o'clock. Calling meeting to order. Welcome to City of Milpitas Planning Commission, October 12th, 2022. Those that want to make a public comment, instructions are in the agenda with the link. Make sure to register so that you can make a comment. Next item, Pledge of Allegiance. I will lead. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item, roll call.
Good evening, commissioners, planning commissioners. I'll now take attendance, starting with Commissioner Albana.
Michelle.
Present.
Commissioner Awasi is absent this evening. Chair Chuan,
Present.
Vice Chair Sierradella,
Present.
Commissioner Galong,
Present.
Commissioner Medina Ashby is absent, and Commissioner Mosin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Medina. Just to note, Commissioner Medina Ashby said she might be dialing in. So, okay, next item, conflict of interest declaration, City Attorney.
Thank you, Chair. I asked the mayor and each council member whether he or she has any financial or personal conflict of interest related to any of the items on tonight's agenda.
Ms. Medina, would you go down the roll, please?
Commissioner Albana,
None.
Chair Chuan,
None.
Vice Chair Sierradella,
None.
Commissioner Galong, Commissioner Mosin.
None.
Thank you.
And you guys don't have any projects or contracts on today, so I don't believe we need the other admonition.
Thank you, City Attorney. Next item, approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda for October 12th, 2022?
Make the motion.
Okay, I got a motion from Commissioner Galong. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Mosin. Roll call vote. Commissioner Mosin,
Aye.
Commissioner Galong. Aye. Commissioner Albana,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sierradella,
Aye.
Chair Chuan is aye. So we have 5 a vote of 5. Next item is, I do have one correction I needed to state for the agenda, recording secretary. So in item 9, section 2, down below is, it says in the recommendation, staff recommends that the planning commission adopt resolution number N22-0XX. The XXX should be 024. Just wanted to make that note.
That is correct, Chair. In the recommendation, resolution number is 22-024. Thank you.
City Attorney, do I need to go down the roll again to make that correction, or just, I mean, since we already approved it?
If you wanted to change the agenda, you could. I'm not 100% sure you need to change the agenda. Just when the motion gets made, the motion should reflect the correct resolution number.
Okay.
You don't have to.
Okay, I'm going to move on then. All right. I just wanted to note that for the record. So next item, approval of the meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes for September 14th?
Move to approve.
Okay, got a motion from Commissioner Mosen. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I got a second from Commissioner Albano. Roll call vote. Commissioner Mosen.
Aye.
Commissioner Galan.
Aye.
Commissioner Albano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ciardella.
Aye.
Chair Chuan is aye. Motion passes. Minutes approved for September 14th by a vote of 5. Next is, can I get a motion to approve the minutes for September 28th? But before we make a motion, I do want to make a few corrections on item number, on the public hearing item 9-2. On page, I guess this is page 3. Yeah, page 3. It says the planning commission adopt the resolution recommending that the city council is written in there twice. So that one should be corrected there. And my understanding also from the motion and the second, the motion was made by actually Commissioner Abana. Did you want to I believe you said you had a correction on that one, right? In terms of who the motion was.
Chair, I believe I did the motion to deny, but is that recorded? Was it checked and verified in the recording?
Actually, I do recall that was it was Commissioner Albana that made the motion to deny. And then the second was from Commissioner Medina Ashby.
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
Okay, I'll review the recording and I'll note it on our next, I'll bring the minutes back for the next meeting for you to
Okay.
review again. I'll make the correction.
Okay.
I'll review and then make the.
So, City Attorney, should we still make approve this and then, or just have her make the corrections and then come back next time and approve it?
So I think you can table those minutes
Okay.
until the next meeting.
Okay, let's do that next. Okay, thank you. All right, so there will not be a vote for this. Next item, announcements. Do any of the planning commissioners have any announcements? I have one announcement for the meeting for October 26th. I will not be present. So I've asked Vice Chair Ciardella to run the meeting if we do have the meeting on October 26th. If by chance I'm able to attend, I will probably attend via Zoom, but it's not likely that I will. So just wanted to make that note. Okay, if there's no announcements from any planning commissioners, planning director.
No, Mr. Chair, I do not have any announcements tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, planning director. Next item, public forum. Those interested are invited to address planning commission on any subject not on tonight's agenda orally via Zoom webinar. Instructions are in the agenda. Speakers may provide their name and city of residence for the recording secretary's record, and comments may be limited to 3 minutes or less. As an item not listed on the agenda, no response is required from city staff or the planning commission, and no action can be taken. Planning commission may instruct the staff to place the item on a future meeting agenda. As there's no one here in the chambers, Ms. Medina, do we have anyone online?
Chair, there are no community members in the queue for public forum.
All right, thank you, Ms. Medina. Next item, public hearing. So item number 9-1, zoning ordinance text amendment, outdoor dining, planning director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I meant to speak up when you were looking at the agenda. This item, at staff's request, we would like to postpone it until your next meeting, continue it. So we'll just have the second item under public hearings tonight.
Okay, thank you, planning director.
Do they need
Okay. Okay. All right. So can I get a motion to okay, can I get a motion to continue the item number 9-1 to the next meeting?
Move to move the public hearing item 9-1 to the next meeting.
Okay, I got a motion from Commissioner Wilson. Do I have a second? You got a motion from Commissioner Wilson and a second from Commissioner Galong. Roll call vote. Commissioner Wilson. Okay, I need your microphone on, please.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
Commissioner Galong.
Aye.
Commissioner Albano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ciardella.
Aye.
And Chair Chuan is aye. Motion passes with the vote of 5. Next item is 9-2, Milpitas residential and mixed use objective design standards, planning director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're very pleased to bring this item back to the Planning Commission. I say back, but we had a discussion, this item before you a few meetings ago for a discussion to give you a preview. And tonight we're bringing it back to you for a formal recommendation to the council. We have our principal planner, Jay Lee, who has been the project manager over this. I'd like to note too that Jay was also instrumental in writing preparing the grant application which paid for this project. So it's nice to see this coming to a conclusion. Grant funded, it's one of a series of grant funded projects that we'll be bringing before you over the next several months. So I'll turn the time over to Jay, and we also have our consultants from Ramey and Associates who have helped us with this project, and Jay can do further introductions. Jay.
Good evening, commissioners. And yeah, we're excited to bring this back, as Ned mentioned, and with our consultants, Ramey and Associates, who have done a great job in preparing objective design standards to comply with state law, but also just help streamline the review process for many of the projects that we would see here at the Planning Commission. And Chris will go, Mr. Sensenig will go into greater detail about these standards, but just as a way of introduction, these standards are applicable to residential and mixed use projects with a residential component. And I'll turn it over to Chris or Mr. Sensenig now to go through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Planner Lee, and thank you, Planning Commission and Director. It's a pleasure to be back here. I'm going to go over a high-level presentation of the standards and then turn it back to Principal Planner Lee for a recommendation. If you can please move to the next slide. Here is an overview of the ODS process. We've been working on this project for the past year or so and are excited to get it over the line and adopted. And so here we are. Next slide. We are here writing objective design standards because of the recent state legislation, including the following laws. They include SB 330, SB 35, and AB 2161. And they state that a city cannot deny or reduce density of housing projects. Cities are required to expedite processing and qualifying residential projects and establish a clear and impartial approval process for multifamily housing projects. Next slide. The goals for the objective standards are to facilitate context-appropriate, high-quality design by establishing objective development and design standards for residential projects, bring consistency and clarity to project review and permitting, eliminate subjectivity and personal judgment by providing consistent and uniform language, and protect the city from legal challenges and court-imposed fines for wrongful denial of housing projects. Next slide. So what are objective design standards? Objective design standards are standards that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and are uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant and public official prior to submittal. And here you see an example of subjective language versus objective language. On the left, provide articulation to reduce the apparent mass and scale of a building and be sensitive to neighborhood context. There are many ways that could be done, and all would be subjective to the planner or commission reviewing. Objective language is more precise. And for instance, here, there's a standard for every 100 feet of building length, there shall be a place break along a facade comprised of an offset of at least 5 feet depth and 25 feet in length. From this experience, we have taken a comprehensive approach to objective standards. Next slide. We create standards that work together across scales, from large urban strategies to fine-grained architecture strategies, to ensure quality buildings and human-scale details. The goal here is to preserve the character of Milpitas neighborhoods by balancing the form and design of existing development with new construction techniques, encourage human-scaled buildings that adhere to existing zoning regulations and promote high-quality site and building design, and emphasize a pedestrian-oriented environment where buildings and public realm design are cohesive and complementary of a diverse range of uses. Next slide. Here's the table of contents for the ODS. It follows the principles I just laid out and a comprehensive set of standards starting from large-scale site layout and site design down to more detailed building design, building elements that include architectural details, and also usable open space standards. Next slide. And one more. So here's an example of an objective design standard. Each standard in the document is tied to intent statements, which have, for the most part, been taken from the general plan. And here you see, as an example, the intent statement is to integrate new large-scale development projects into the fabric of the existing community, land use general plan, goal 5.1. Reduce block size in new developments to develop a grid or modified grid network to enhance walkability, circulation 1.5. And provide pedestrian and vehicular connections with cross-access easements within and between the existing developments to encourage walking, community development 10.11. So from here, we created an objective design standard that limits the maximum block size and requires mid-block connections for larger projects. Next slide. For site planning and shared public access to open space. These are standards that apply to large sites. Here, we create standards that require projects to allocate a percentage of their land for publicly accessible open spaces. And we have two tiers of standards here, one for lower rise, essentially up to 3 or 4 stories, projects that have a lower density, and then a higher standard for projects that will exceed 45 feet in height and be built at a greater density. Next slide. The document also has standards for special conditions like adjacency to freeways, channels, and also lower scale residential development like you see here, where an additional requirement of building step backs are needed. Next slide. There is a robust building design section with the purpose to refine the building massing and form through facade modulations, establish transitions to lower scale development, create human scaled architecture, and create visual interest in placemaking. Next slide. The design standards focus first on the large moves concerning the massing and form of the building, down to standards for individual building elements. This starts with requiring upper floor mass reductions, the major building breaks to reduce the scale of buildings, then additional minor facade breaks and modulations to represent a residential rhythm and pattern. Then the standards move into more detail, requiring variations in facade compositions, additional architectural articulation, and then fine-grained details for window design and ground floor standards. Next slide. Here we see the standards for upper floor massing reduction. It is typical of many of the standards in the document to allow for options on how to meet the intent of the standards. This provides flexibility in design and provides a variety of options for different conditions while still improving the overall quality of design in the city. Next slide. To break up large buildings, the ODS is requiring major breaks every 150 feet. If a building is over 320 feet in length, 2 major breaks are required, but the second one can be smaller than the first. Next slide. In addition to major breaks, further facade modulations are required for building lengths up to 150 feet without a major break. Here are 3 options to meet this standard. These standards ensure a human scale design that matches the rhythm and pattern of residential buildings. Next slide. The ODS also requires variation in facade compositions to create architectural variety, visual interest, and human scale design. Next slide. In addition to building scale standards, here we begin to see more of the fine-grained standards. There is a comprehensive set of ground floor design standards to create an inviting and interesting ground floors that enhance the pedestrian realm and to create places for people to gather and spend time outdoors. Here you see an example of ground floor commercial standards and details for residential unit entries. Next slide. We also understand there is complexity in design. Here you see an example of the regulations or an example of regulating that complexity through providing options. These standards will ensure that we don't get boring, monotonous buildings with the same facade over and over again. Next slide. The objective standards also include new standards for open spaces, both public, common, within a building, and private associated with individual units. They include minimum size standards for balconies, minimum size standards for courtyards, landscape requirements, and other standards to ensure quality open spaces. Next slide. Thank you. So the review and approval process, there are 2 pathways for project approval. The first is required by SB 330, which require a staff level approval with no personal or subjective judgment by a public official. This pathway is to speed up the approvals and give assurance to housing developers. If a project meets the objective design standards, the city is required to approve the project. To provide limited discretion for minor modifications, the city has built in a process for waivers that do not deviate more than 10% from the standard, and that can produce findings that the project meets the intent statements for each standard. There's also a secondary pathway should an applicant choose not to meet the objective design standards. If they choose this path, it is similar to the previous way things are done, where there is a detailed design review, potentially additional public meetings, and potential discretionary review by the Planning Commission. Discretionary projects will still be required to meet the intent statements in the ODS document. Next 2 slides. So here we are. The public draft has been was published in July or early August and has been open for public comment. We've taken in comment from both city staff and the public, and we are here at final adoption. So now I will turn it over to Principal Planner Lee for the recommendation.
Staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 22-024, recommending that the City Council adopt the Milpitas residential and mixed-use objective design standards to provide clear and implementable design criteria for all new residential developments and mixed-use developments with the residential component. So this concludes our presentation, and we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Principal Planner Lee. Do any of the commissioners have any questions? I see that Vice Chair Ciardella.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Looking through this, I noticed a couple of things that, were kind of, I guess, thinking about it a little more, I'm thinking, okay, God, this on page 29 of the residential and mixed use objective design standards. Yeah, no, it's this one. Oh, I'm sorry. Milpitas residential and mixed use objective design standards. And on page 28, second one down, non-plant material soil and mulches. And it talks about using crushed rock, mulch, pebbles, stones, no more than 50%. I think I might have an issue with that. I don't mind the mulches, but I'm afraid the rock, it's going to heat up the rocks, and it's going to heat up the soil, and it's going to require more water. That's one of them. Then let's see here. Under Milpitas residential and mixed use objectives, we talked about soils, and in my previous life here, I owned a garden center. We made up soil mixes for residential buildings for rooftop gardens. And when it says soil, we never put any dirt in it. It was all lightweight soil, because that's what the architect required. And if I look at this, I think soils, I think of dirt. So I don't know if we could put lightweight soils in there or something like that. I don't know, that's the second question. And then the third question, and I'll be darned, I can't find it now. But it talked about street trees and sidewalks. And I know in my neighborhood, they went through and fixed quite a few of the sidewalks because of the street trees. And I know there's a product, I believe it's called Root Barrier. And it's like a, what would you call it? A metal or a plastic that goes alongside the roots down probably 4 or 5 feet. This way the roots go down way below and they're not coming out and wrecking the sidewalks. So there's 3 of the things I had.
I could start, if I may, by speaking about the first question, and Mr. Sensenig, feel free to chime in. But for the first question about the rocks, crushed rock and some of the other non-plant material, the intent of that was to actually reduce the water demand, to provide an alternative for residents to use materials that don't require any water. So actually, I do think the incorporation of those materials would decrease water usage. And then for the second question regarding soil, perhaps maybe Mr. Sensen could touch upon that, and then also the third question.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any standard to require lightweight soil, but as you mentioned, most landscape architects and architects working on a podium courtyard or rooftop will need to specify that for structural loads. So we didn't go into that level of detail. You know, we just ensured a minimum depth that we felt is adequate to ensure that the plants grow as they should. And then the one about street trees, our goal was to make sure that we have a certain spacing. And we could certainly either check with Public Works to see if they have a root barrier standard for street trees, or we could potentially look at adding a standard like that here.
Okay, thank you. And then, you know, I kept looking and it kept talking about native plant material. Are you guys talking about drought tolerant plant material? Because I think this is going to be the normal for a while.
Yes, the standard is about drought tolerant species.
Okay, so they all are drought tolerant. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other questions from any other commissioners? Commissioner Albana.
I have a question for Mr. Lee. I looked at the illustration of the sidewalk sections in our, excuse me, the objective design standards, and we're planning this for our future use and development. How can we incorporate those old designed areas with our new ones that's upcoming for the future use of what we're putting together today? For the bicycle lanes, you know, we're trying to encourage the community to use bicycles, scooters. And I noticed by Milpitas Boulevard, there are nice trails that a biker can use, a scooter rider can use. But I see here, it just says pedestrian clear. Where would be the bicycles and scooter lane design?
Yeah, the bicycle lane design would happen on the public streets. So that would be not like per development here, but a larger planning effort, I would believe, between Public Works and the planning department. But I'll
Ye-
turn that over to you, Principal Lee.
Yeah, thank you. We do have a master pedestrian and bicycle and trails plan that we recently updated and adopted. And that establishes that document establishes the bicycle lanes and the trails that we want in our city. And the way that that would be achieved or implemented would be what Mr. Sensenig was saying, either through a larger citywide process to ensure certain projects get consistently certain improvements get consistently applied for large areas of the city, but it could also happen on a project by project basis where as development projects come in, we would look at the master plan and require improvements to piece by piece start implementing bike lanes and trails in our city. So it could happen either way. And these standards focus more on the sidewalks that are within the private development, and so the diagrams that you see didn't dive into bike lanes because that wasn't really part of the scope for this project. But both documents would apply for development projects and would work together.
I see. Thank you. It got cleared because that will be part of the street, as Mr. Sensing had said. So, okay, I get it. And thank you. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Albana. Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It is of great interest to me. This is going to be something wonderful, and this will give us high quality designs. I just had a few questions to understand this. You mentioned several times human scale design. What does that mean?
Yeah, human scale design means that when you're designing, a lot of the recent buildings in Milpitas are quite large buildings, and it's breaking down the elements of the building to something that can be recognizable and identified and kind of enjoyed at the pedestrian scale, the human scale. And so, we have a number of different standards that address this. Some in like the more fine-grained detail. It's about the quality of the material, the depth that a window is from the facade, so it gives a little shadow that you can see and identify and provides visual interest. Creating nice little stoops and individual entries for ground floor residential units. So as you're walking by a building, there are more entries, more interactions between people. And then as you get larger, it's about creating a rhythm and pattern that reflects the residential character of the building. So that would mean that there would be architectural articulation, which means, different shapes, bay windows, for instance, or screening or change in materials that kind of happens at the scale of either a room inside of a unit or at the scale of a residential unit, which, ends up being typically between 25 and 40 feet in length. So you get that, that rhythm and pattern that represents, the human spaces that are inside the building, and then details that are recognizable to a pedestrian.
Okay. Thank you. One more question. So what will be the minimum sizes for the windows and doors, since they are part of visual interests? Is there something, a criteria for that, or that is?
There are minimum sizes for like entries to buildings. You're not going to find it in the presentation here, but
That's okay. You can just tell.
Yeah.
That.
But I'm trying to page through the document here and find that section for you. I believe it starts at kind of page 62, where there are minimum sizes for individual residential entries. For multifamily entries, there's a minimum size for that lobby. Same with for commercial entries. There are details for storefront designs that have the size of the entry doors, how much of the storefront needs to be transparent glazing, kind of the rhythm and pattern of the columning for that. And there's also a requirement for larger buildings with 9 or more ground floor units, that a minimum of 80% of the ground floor residential units that face a public right of way shall have an unit entry with direct access from the sidewalk. And then again, there's minimum sizes for the stoops, the porches, and the entryways. Again, this starts on page 62 and then runs, I think, through page 67.
I think to summarize, we have higher requirements for transparency for the ground floor retail uses in a mixed use building. And also for residential at the end units, which are typically the most visible to the public. And we have minimum recess. The windows have to be recessed a minimum amount to provide some breaks in the facade so that the building isn't completely flat. Yeah, some other ones to note.
Okay. So to avoid the monotonous looks of building, how will the staff intervene in it? How are they going to connect with the builders? How is that going to happen? I know
So,
it's in here somewhere.
yeah, so I mean, these objective design standards, after adopted, they become essentially part of the code. So they are, quote, knowable. And so when a developer or property owner comes in and wants to develop their property, you know, they would need to look at the zoning code and understand what all the development standards are, and then also adhere to these objective design standards. And then when the applicant comes in, the city will have a checklist and review the projects to these objective design standards. Principal Lee, did I leave anything out there?
I think that covers it.
May I add something really quickly? So Commissioner Mosen, if I may, one of the other purposes of these standards is to make it, as was stated at the beginning, is to streamline the process. So one of the beauties of it is that there won't be as much back and forth. Well, from staff, like, well, we don't quite like that. How about something like this?
Sure.
Rather than that, before the developer comes into the city, they can look at our standards, and if they meet those standards, then they move forward, and it takes a lot of the questioning out of it. So we've tried to calibrate them very quickly or very carefully, and I think our consultants have done a very good job in trying to articulate and make as clear as possible what the standard will be, so that both staff and the developer understand that, and everybody's on the same playing field from the very beginning.
Yes, it's a huge process, and I'm sure you guys went through a lot of work, and it reflects very well. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Mosen. Any other questions? Vice Chair Sudella.
Yeah, I've got a question for the director here, Ned. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking back, 6 months ago when we had a project that was within a half a mile of a transit area. And we had to decrease the indoor parking. Is the state going to be able to take this and throw it out the window and tell us whatever they want to tell us?
That's a very good question. I wouldn't want to guess what this legislature might do next, but these design standard, I will say that these design standards came out of that type of thinking by the legislature, and that it seems like most of the legislation related to housing and mixed use lately has looked at streamlining the process. And part of that was to remove some of the guesswork out of the design process, which can, not often, but can bog down, the discussion between the city and the developer. So again, I think that's the beauty of these standards, is to be able to have an even playing field, that everybody knows this is what the city is looking for. And if you meet this standard, as Mr. Sensenig mentioned, we'll have a checklist. And if you check all the boxes, then your project moves forward very quickly. There is an alternative to that process. I think that's also the beauty of the way this is set up, that yes, we've established a standard and we would hope that everyone try to meet that standard. But if for some reason a developer wants to do something different, we have included a little bit of flexibility in it. So as you saw in one of the slides, there's 2 different processes. If you meet the standard, you move forward and it's approved. And if not, you can go through our regular process where you come to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission can have some say. And in that case, we would present both sides and, let the Planning Commission decide. I also like, in regard to flexibility, I also like that we have built into it, as also was mentioned in one of the slides, that even though we have a standard, we don't want to do one size fits all. So if it needs to deviate, and we went back and forth on this, we cited, well, about 10%. If whatever the developer proposes is a little bit different than what the actual standard is, it can vary from 10%, and that can be allowed to happen, provided that it meets those intent statements of intent that is included with every standard. So I think that gives us a very rational, clear, straightforward, objective process, as well as an objective standard to follow. This applies, of course, to residential and mixed use development. I would hope that sometime in the future we might have additional funding that we could do that for other types of development in the city as well. But this will serve us very well.
Thank you.
I would also note these design standards are in part a result of the state attempting to take local control away from the cities. So SB 330 was passed that says that each jurisdiction must have these sorts of objective design standards.
Thank you, Vice Chair Ciardella, and thank you, City Attorney. Thank you, Planning Director. Any other questions from any other commissioners? So I do want to note that we also have Deputy Fire Chief Belton on as well too. So I realize that the bulk of the questions you're asking is for the Mr. Sensenig as well as our planning staff. Does anybody have any questions for Deputy Fire Chief Belton? All right. Does anybody have any other questions? All right. Well, if there's no other questions, this being a public hearing item, I'd like to open up. Oh, I'm sorry, Planning Director.
Let me make one other quick comment. So these standards will, for the time being, will sit independent of the zoning ordinance, as we, in the next year, we'll be doing a comprehensive update to the zoning ordinance, and they may be incorporated into the ordinance at that time. But as with anything that's new, we expect that there may be some, as we get it into practice, there may be some tweaks here and there. And if we have minor modifications that need to be made, we didn't want to have to go back each time and do a zoning ordinance update. So just to clarify for him, that this will be established, if it's approved by the council, as a separate set of standards for the city. We currently have something that's similar to this because of SB 330 that is currently in force, as we've had a couple of projects that have come forward under SB 330, and we needed to have a checklist. So we put that together, but this is a more robust list that goes through, as you saw, everything from site planning to site design to building design and architectural standards. So it's quite a bit more than what we have nowadays. again, wanted to clarify that it will be separate from the zoning ordinance, but it will be an adopted, if it's approved by the city, it will be an adopted standard used by the planning department for mixed use and residential development.
Thank you, Planning Director. Any other questions? If there's no questions, then this being a public hearing item, I'd like to open up the public forum. No one's here in the chambers. Ms. Medina, do we have anyone on Zoom that has any public comment?
Chair, there are no community members in the queue or public room for this
Thank you.
item.
Thank you, Ms. Medina. If there's no members in the public want to make a public comment, can I get a motion to close the public forum?
Seeing none, move to close the public hearing.
Okay, got a motion from Commissioner Mosen. Do I have a second?
Second,
And a second from Commissioner Albana. Roll call vote. Commissioner Mosen,
Aye.
Commissioner Galong,
Aye.
Commissioner Albana,
aye.
Vice Chair Ciardella,
Aye.
Chair Chuan is aye. Public forum is now closed. Okay, any final questions or any comments or deliberations from any of the commissioners? Commissioner Galong, I see you have your light on. Okay, if there's, I don't see any questions or no one wants to make any comment, do I have any motions? Commissioner Albana.
Chair, knowing that this objective design standards will help ensure compliance with our SB 35, and it is something that we could use so that it could cut down the processing of our permitting and all of the stuff. I therefore would like to move for the approval of this. I recommend.
Yeah, it's on the screen. So,
I move that we adopt the resolution 22-024, recommending that the city council adopt the Milpitas residential and objective design standards to provide clear and implementation design criteria, new residential developments, and mixed-use developments with a residential component.
thank you, Commissioner Albana. I got a motion from Commissioner Albana. Do I have a second?
Second.
I got a second from Vice Chair Ciardella. Roll call vote. Commissioner Mosen. Okay.
Aye.
Okay, Commissioner Galong,
Aye.
Commissioner Albana,
Aye.
Vice Chair Ciardella,
Aye.
Chair Chuan is aye. Motion passes. The resolution's adopted. Congratulations. Very nice work from the planning staff as well as Mr. Sensitive. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Next item, new business. There are no items. And I will now read the legalese. Any person aggrieved by any final decision of any board, commission, or department head to the city of Milpitas may appeal the decision to the city council by filing written notice of the appeal with the city clerk within 12 calendar days of the date of said decision and paying the required fee. This time limit shall be strictly enforced. Next item, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, got a motion from Vice Chair Ciardella. Do I have a second? And got a second from Commissioner Galong. Roll call vote. Commissioner Mosen,
Aye.
Commissioner Galong,
Aye.
Commissioner Albana,
Aye.
Vice Chair Ciardella,
Aye.
Chair Chuan is aye. Motion, meeting's adjourned.